addressing a question that came in through the Legit Podcast Pro Facebook group. Karen has a question about true crime cases in the public domain, so stay tuned. We'll be right with you. Welcome to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is the show where I help you make yourself a legit podcast pro. And by that, I don't mean you have to be in it to make money. You don't have to be in it as a profession, but you have to have a professional attitude, a professional approach. You take your sound seriously, you take your content seriously, and I'm here to help you take your business and the back end parts of things, the legal and business aspects of what you're doing seriously. And today we're addressing this question from Karen, who's a member of the Legit Podcast Pro Facebook group. She says, are we okay to present our true crime case stories each week without worry that a family member we might discuss or a law enforcement that we discuss won't come back and sue us for some reason? The podcast presents just factual information as we know it. What are your thoughts? Well, Karen, first off, I'm going to take issue with the question. She also said that the information was in the public domain. I'm going to take a little issue with that because public domain is a term of legal art that addresses copyright and trademark kinds of issues that are where, copyrights and trademarks that have expired or are no longer in force for one reason or another. But I understand the meaning of the question to be that it's public information, public knowledge, well-known cases that have been tried in the public forum of the courts and reported widely and that kind of thing. Well, here, to answer your question, Karen, anyone here in the U.S., anybody can sue anybody at any time and really for any reason. So I can't say whether or not you're safe from being sued. What I can say is the lawyer's answer is it's really about whether or not they can sue and win in a lawsuit against you. Now, a lawsuit can be a very manipulative tool, and there are all kinds of components to this. So what I want to do is take the question by the numbers on the legal elements, the three basic issues that we need to talk about when it comes to true crime stories. First is libel, second is privacy, and third is plagiarism and sometimes copyright infringement. So first off, when you're talking about an event that was publicly reported and well known, then I have to assume that there has been obviously some other journalism about the case that you're talking about. So my first recommendation is that you should be a journalist about this. That is, make sure that you are getting corroboration and not just using and relying on a single source for everything. For each kind of factual assertion that you make in your show, you should have two or three or more corroborating bits of evidence. That is, it was reported in this thing and so said this in the trial transcript and, some other, it's reported in multiple places, those kinds of things. The reason for that is that, something like Wikipedia, that could be manipulated very easily. Somebody could have gotten on there and changed the Wikipedia entry, 10 minutes before you went in and looked at it while you're doing your research. So you want to make sure that everything that's said about anyone in your thing, whether it's that family member or the actual, perpetrator, the defendant in the case, or the cop that was investigating, or the chief of police, or the medical examiner, whatever, you've got to be able to be sure that everything that you say in that environment is true, and that you have multiple sources to establish that it's true, or more likely than not true. You want that so that you can hold this up and say, hey, I have ample evidence that this is a true statement, because truth, you see, is a defense to claims of libel and slander. Now, defamation is the umbrella term for libel and slander. Slander is the spoken word version where you're in a small group of people. You walk into a room, you get on a little stage or something, and, in a small environment, you make this oral statement that is defamatory. I'll go into what that means in a minute. And it's fleeting. It's not recorded or reproducible or anything like that. That would be considered slander. And when you use mass media or electronic media, digital media, when you publish it in a book or a newspaper or on television or something like that, that is libel. So that's the main distinction, the means and manner of the communication. And it has to do mainly with the breadth and scope and extent of the message's distribution or possible distribution. So because we're talking about podcasting, that's using electronic media, we're talking about libel. But the overall category is what I said before, defamation. A statement is defamatory when it is a published statement, it's false, and it's of or concerning a particular person, the plaintiff in the lawsuit, and it causes that person harm or injury to reputation or standing in the community, or sometimes they say scorn or obloquy is brought upon the person. So truth, obviously, is a defense. Other defenses are that it's a statement of opinion and not a factual statement. If it's a truly held opinion and not merely a fact disguising itself as opinion. So you have to be a little thoughtful and careful that you don't express your opinions and your facts as opinions and vice versa, because that really won't fly. But remember, I said the statement has to be of and concerning the plaintiff. So mentioning a group, an organization, or an institution probably isn't a particular plaintiff, but not specifying an of or concerning specific person. Excuse me. Bless me. Okay. But if you're talking about a specific family member or a specific law enforcement officer or a prosecutor or judge, even if you don't call them out by name, if they are identifiable from what you say, from the facts of the story that you're telling, and you publish this statement that's false about them, about the performance of their work or their off-duty activities, their personal lives, their agenda, or really anything that could harm their reputation, then you might be exposed to a case for libel. But here's an important caveat. When the person, the plaintiff, is a public figure or a public official, like an elected police sergeant or a public official, a police officer is a public official, or a public figure, an elected representative, or someone who has put themselves out in the public for one reason or another, well, then there's this added element that they would have to prove. That because of the First Amendment, they have to prove actual malice, which requires proof that when you made the statement, you knew it was false, or you acted with reckless disregard for the truth or falsity of the statement. And that's a pretty high bar for them to prove. So, but that's why you want to be able to say, hey, it's true. And here, I've got 3 or 5 or however many other sources that all say the same thing as the truth, the true facts about this person. It's very hard for them to refute that. And why didn't you sue them when they said, when they said that thing 6 years ago in that newspaper or that whatever? So those kinds of things. So that's defamation. Truth and opinion are your most common defenses in defamation cases. Now, if it was a statement that was made in open court or in the legal pleadings in the court, that's privileged also. There's a privilege of a person to make that statement in court, and then you are free to report on the fact that the statement was made. And in order to do that, you kind of have to talk about the content of the statement, so you don't get in trouble for republishing under those circumstances. This is what we call the fair report or fair comment privilege. So there's a lot of these defenses available. And here in the United States, freedom of speech, freedom of the press under our First Amendment is very powerful. And as a journalist doing true crime reporting, you are the press. So you have that freedom, but you have to act like you're a journalist. So what I want to do right now is just quickly take a second to let you know about the free Legit Podcast Pro community, where you can come to get further into these kinds of questions and learn more about what it means to be a legit podcast pro. So please visit legitpodcastpro.com and sign up for membership. It's free. Why wouldn't you do it? Okay, so we've covered defamation. Now next, in addition to the defamation kinds of claims that we talked about, we have to think about privacy. If you reveal new information that is not already out there in public, it's private nature about a person, you might be looking at a claim for invasion of privacy or what was called public disclosure of private facts. Again, if it's not already public information. So think hard about that kind of information, whether it really adds any value to present that stuff. Now, the legal standard in these privacy kinds of cases looks at whether or not it would be offensive to a reasonable person to have had that information, medical history, sexual orientation, educational records, all those kinds of things, to have that published. If the jury of reasonable people would find that offensive, then that's the test. That would be a violation. So obviously, if you are surveilling people, you might get into invading intruding into their solitude and seclusion. And then there's another kind, false light invasion of privacy, where it's sort of an offensive presentation of information that, while it's objectively true, the way you present it creates a false impression about that person. So that's another privacy kind of claim that you have to think about, false light privacy. And then the fourth kind of privacy gets us into another area. It's called the misappropriation of a person's name or likeness or other aspect of persona. And some states, about half of the states, have a law called a right of publicity law that takes this a little bit further. But the basics are the same. You're using a person's name or likeness for a commercial purpose without their permission. Commercial purpose means that it's some kind of a business transaction. Hey, buy my stuff, buy this thing, an advertisement for a product or proposing some kind of a purchase or transaction. But podcast content, true crime storytelling, reporting, probably not going to be considered commercial. Now, I'd still be careful about using people's names in the title of your show. But other than that, I think you're in pretty good shape doing this. So back to the point. As long as it's true or, truly held opinion, not a fact masquerading opinion, and as long as it's not the kind of thing that people expect to be kept private, you're in pretty good shape. But let's now talk just a moment more about copyright and plagiarism. What I want to say to you here is be a journalist. Don't just copy what you see on Wikipedia or what you find in a newspaper article or something. Don't just read other people's works into your microphone. Don't just rely on one news account or one other journalist's news account. You want to do your own journalism and legwork to make your presentation of the information as original as you can. Now, the facts are the facts. You can report on the facts, but the way one person tells those facts may be protected by copyright. But even if it's not protected by copyright, you can, you can encounter problems if you really are just copying their work efforts. You can use these things as source material, yes, but then you got to write and assemble it in your own expression of the facts that are included. That's how you avoid copyright infringement and plagiarism claims. And this has been a hot topic in the true crime arena over the past few years. There have been a number of claims against podcasters by journalists saying, hey, I did all the legwork to get and report that story and to do the series in my publication or whatever else. And all you, the podcaster, are doing is really just paraphrasing my journalism, my reporting. And that is not okay. That is plagiarism, even if it's not copyright infringement, which is where you're actually copying the content itself. But even if you're paraphrasing, if you're using the same structure and the same overall sort of outline of things that the way the journalist did before you, changing things up a little bit isn't going to be enough. If you're not doing your own investigation, aggregating and compiling from lots of other sources, then you're still doing plagiarism, even if it's not infringement. And while you may not get sued for plagiarism, you may get outed for it, and that will hurt your reputation in the long run. So do your own research and reading and legwork and check those court records. Go beyond merely what's on Wikipedia or merely what you found in the local newspaper of record. Do your own digging, make it your own, apply your own perspective and angle so you don't get accused of this literary version of copying, essentially. There have been a handful of podcasters who've actually had to stop publishing episodes. In fact, one podcast that was accused of this was with the New York Times and presented things in a way that just wasn't very reasonable given all the circumstances. So be thoughtful, be careful, and be a journalist with some integrity about this, not merely an echo chamber. So that covers it for libel and privacy and plagiarism and copyright. Now, obviously, there's a lot more depth to all of this, but I hope it will help you to spot the issues so you can do your true crime show with confidence. And once again, this episode is brought to you by the free Legit Podcast Pro community, where you'll find more depth on these and other kinds of issues, and you can learn more about getting legit as a podcast pro. And I'm in there doing live Q&A sessions, bonus trainings, and more inside the group. So please join. It is absolutely free. Visit legitpodcastpro.com and join us. And with that, I'll say thanks for being here. That's it for this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I'll see you again next time. Have a great week.